They will tell you this war is about flags, about ancient grudges, about lines drawn on a map and the ghosts of empires past. They will show you soldiers and tanks and call it a battle for ideology, for land, for the soul of a nation. But look closer. Follow the smoke. Follow the steel. Follow it past the battlefields and the political speeches, past the flag-draped coffins and the ruined cities. Follow it all the way to where the real power lives. You will find it doesn't end in a trench or a presidential palace. It ends in a boardroom. It ends in a bank vault. It ends with a figure that never sleeps, never bleeds, and never dies. This is not a story about a war for territory. This is a story about a war for treasure. A story of how the world's most valuable commodity and the world's most profitable industry lit the fuse on the biggest conflict in Europe since 1945. This is the story of how money started the Russia-Ukraine war. For decades, Europe grew fat and warm on a river of fire. A river that began deep in the frozen gas fields of Siberia and flowed west through a network of steel arteries. These arteries pumped cheap, abundant natural gas into German factories, French homes, and Italian power plants. And for decades, Russia got richer. It was a perfect, silent bargain. Europe got energy security without thinking about it. Russia got a steady river of billions of dollars. But a river needs a path. And for most of this story, the main path, the largest of these energy arteries, ran right through the heart of a country called Ukraine. Think of Ukraine not as a country, but as a massive multi-billion-dollar toll booth. Every time Russia turned on the tap, Ukraine turned the key. They earned massive transit fees. More importantly, they held a kind of power. If Ukraine and Russia fought hand, they often did over debt and politics. Ukraine could threaten to shut the valves. They could freeze Europe in the middle of winter to get what they wanted. For Moscow, this was intolerable. It was a strategic weakness. So Vladimir Putin, a man who came of age in the KGB, a man who thinks in terms of leverage and control, did what any chess player would do. He decided to build a bypass, Nord Stream. A pair of pipelines built directly under the Baltic Sea, connecting Russia directly to Germany. It was an engineering marvel. And a geopolitical earthquake. Suddenly, Russia could sell its gas directly to its richest customer. Ukraine was no longer the indispensable toll booth. It was just a piece of land. Its leverage evaporated overnight. For Ukraine, this was an existential threat. If the gas stopped flowing through their pipes, they didn't just lose money. They lost their reason for being relevant to the West. They lost their shield. The moment Russia could turn off the taps to Ukraine without freezing Germany, the game changed. The pressure was now a weapon that could be aimed directly at Kyiv. The battle for the pipelines was the first shot, fired years before the first tank rolled. Now, look at the map again, but this time, don't see flags, see markets, see contracts. To the west of Ukraine, there is another massive machine. It calls itself a defensive alliance. Its name is NATO. But behind the speeches about freedom and democracy, NATO is also one of the most powerful economic engines on Earth. It is a military-industrial protection racket on a continental scale. Its core promise is simple. An attack on one is an attack on all. But to make that promise real, you need armies. You need bases. You need the latest jets, the most advanced radar systems, and an endless supply of ammunition. All of this costs money. It was the world's most powerful economic bloc, swallowing its historic sphere of influence. Countries that once bought Russian gas and Russian weapons were now buying American gas and American jets. For years, Russia begged, bargained, and bluffed. They drew their own red lines. No further, they said. Ukraine is the line. They saw Ukraine not just as a neighbor, but as the last buffer, the last piece of the chessboard that would keep NATO's armies and the trillion-dollar industry behind them away from its heartland. But the engine kept pushing. The logic of expansion was more powerful than any promise. Because for the defense industry, peace is a recession. Stagnation is a loss. Expansion is the only thing that pays. And then, the unthinkable happens. The fuse finally reaches the powder keg. The tanks roll. The missiles fly. The world holds its breath. But in boardrooms thousands of miles from the sound of shelling, a different kind of sound is heard. The sound of profit margins expanding. This is the moment the Iron Eagles feast. War is the ultimate market. It creates immediate, urgent, infinite demand. Suddenly, the stockpiles that cost billions to build are being depleted in weeks. They need to be replaced. The weapons that are most effective become the stars of the show, advertised live on the global stage. Every Javelin missile fired in Ukraine is not just an explosion. It is a 24-hour news cycle. It is a live demonstration for militaries in Asia and the Middle East. See how effective this is. The ads scream without making a sound. Buy more. Look at the money. The United States and its allies pledge billions in military aid to Ukraine. This is called support. And it is. But follow the dollar. Where does it go? It doesn't just vanish on the battlefield. It flows back to the factories in Alabama, in Texas, in Pennsylvania. It pays for new assembly lines, new research, and new jobs. The more intense the war, the more complex the weapons needed. First, it was rifles and ammunition. Then, it was anti-tank missiles. Then, it was advanced rocket systems and drones. Each escalation is a new contract. Each new piece of technology is a new revenue stream. This is not a conspiracy. It is the cold, hard logic of a system built on war. A system where a conflict in Eastern Europe is a stimulus package for defense industries on the other side of the ocean. For them, this war is not a tragedy. It is a business cycle, a very, very good one. So, we arrive at the present. Ukraine is no longer just a country. It is a chessboard. And on this board, two grandmasters are playing a game that is not about checkmate, but about attrition. About bleeding your opponent dry without ever touching them. For America and its allies, this war is a perfect proxy. They do not have to send their own sons and daughters to die. Instead, they send weapons. They send money. They send intelligence. And with every weapon they send, they weaken their primary geopolitical rival, Russia, without losing a single American soldier. It is the ultimate return on investment. They get to fight Russia to the last Ukrainian. For Russia, the war is also about economics. The sanctions are a brutal siege. They are cut off from the global financial system. Their goal becomes to survive the siege, to reroute their economy, and to use their remaining energy and resources as weapons. They turn the gas pipelines into a lever of pain. When Europe supports Ukraine, Russia turns down the taps. Winter becomes a weapon. Energy becomes a hostage. It is a war of economies, fought with artillery shells as the messengers. Ukraine itself becomes the battlefield where the New World Order is being forged. The West pours in billions to defend a principle and weaken an enemy. Russia pours in its treasury and its men to prevent a military alliance from swallowing its last buffer state. And in the middle, caught between these two tectonic plates, are the people. History is moved by money, but it is decided by men. Two men, sitting at the heart of this storm. In Kyiv, a former comedian, when the storm broke, he was offered escape. He chose to stay. His image, filmed on a smartphone in a dark corridor, became a symbol of defiance. He asks for planes, for guns, for money, not just to fight, but to survive. His power comes from the cameras, from the unity of his people, and from the lifeline of billions of dollars flowing in from the West. He is the face of resistance. In Moscow, a former KGB officer, a man who has spent his life in the shadows of power. He sits alone at the end of a massive table, a universe away from the people he leads. He sees the world not as it is, but as a series of threats and humiliations. He sees the expansion of NATO, the gas bypass, the revolution in Kyiv, not as politics, but as a personal betrayal. They are the two faces of this war. One asking for the world's help, the other telling the world to stay out. The money, once their tool, now dictates their every move. When the last shot is fired and the last treaty is signed, they will gather in grand halls to count the cost. A transfer of wealth from the blood of the many to the bank accounts of the few. And in that transaction, there are no winners. They will rebuild the cities. They will never rebuild the dead. The question is, who was buying what they were selling?